Marketer of the Day, episode 784. Smarter than a startup. Buy, manage, and run a business the risk-reduced way with David Barnett.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Marketer of the Day podcast. We are here with return guest after about 5 years, David Barnett, and he has a book out called Smarter Than a Startup, where he's going to tell us all about how we can buy a business, manage a business, run a business. So the book is called Smarter Than a Startup, the risk-reduced way to get the business of your dreams up and running. We're going to hear all about what to do, what not to do, mistakes made along the way, and lots of fun. So David, glad to be talking to you.
Hey, Robert, it's awesome to be back. It's been too long, buddy.
It has been too long, and you were one of my first guests. I think you were like my sixth or seventh guest, so it's a little bit of a blast from the past. Plus, last time we didn't really have the technology or the bandwidth to be on video, so it was just like talking on the phone. So it's like, I know you, but I don't know you, and probably the same for you.
Well, things certainly have been changing quickly. Since I was on your show last, a lot of new things have happened. But like you mentioned, one of the news things that happened was I published that new book, Smarter Than a Startup. And basically, the reason I put it out is because my main business is helping people buy and sell businesses. And people would come to me after this long roundabout route of wanting to be in business. And when most people decide they want to be in business, the first thing they think about is starting a business. And then eventually, as people explore that idea, they realize, hey, wait a minute, there's risk here. There's all kinds of stats out there about how 90% of businesses end up failing, new startups. And so people eventually come to the idea, maybe I should buy one. That's when I usually meet them. And I was thinking, how can I find a way to meet these people sooner and show them that even if they want to start something completely new, buying a business may still be the path to help them create their new business while reducing risk in a tremendous way.
And, as you're explaining it, the metaphor that comes to mind is people always think, well, I'll buy a house and flip it. But if you said, well, I'll buy a blank piece of dirt and I'll hook up all the power and the utility and get all the permits and get a sidewalk and a driveway put in and erect all this. It sounds like something that's about 25 times more complex than taking something that's already existing and then doing something with it. And like you hear all the time about how someone will buy this business or even like this website for like 30 grand and then build it up to like 300 grand really quickly, as opposed to starting from zero. And what I really liked about what you said in there is that even if you buy a business, you're not stuck with what the business has been doing all this time. It sounds like you can change it to suit your needs or pivot or things like that. So can you unpack that a little bit? Because like just like you said, you want to get to these people sooner than before they make all these mistakes. And the feeling at first is, oh yeah, I don't want to be a owner of someone else's business, but it sounds like you can make it your own.
Yeah, no, great point, and an apt analogy about the house. The reason why most people think about starting a business from scratch is because, number one, we have this startup culture. If you go to the bookstore, there are hundreds of books about starting different businesses. You would be hard pressed to find one or two about buying an existing business. So it's just culturally, we're more aware of this idea of starting a business. The second thing is that people think that buying a business will cost a lot of money, whereas starting a business might not cost as much. I can tell you that if you have money set aside to be sort of your initial nest egg to start a business, you probably can parlay that money into an acquisition. The big difference is an existing business that already has profits and cash flow is going to be a suitable candidate for borrowing, whereas a new startup is not, because you don't have that track record. So number one, when you buy a business, you get something that already has customers, sales, profits, etc. Your door is open to bankers and other lenders because they can see how you can afford to pay them back. Even if the business you buy isn't directly in line with what your dream is as far as something new, you go looking for, and this is what I explain in the book, is you can go looking for a business that's already successful but has some of the resources you would normally need for your new startup idea. And then you buy this business that's already making money. It can pay for itself over time, but you can then use the business's resources in order to execute this dream or plan that you have. And if your dream or plan doesn't work out, you still have that the basis of the successful business that you started with. So the whole point of the idea is to figure out how you're going to get into business without risking everything. Because of course, what happens when people get into something that's new, things don't work out. They're not sure what's wrong. They try to pivot, they try to adjust. Eventually they run out of money. And then there's a certain point where they should probably quit. If they don't know where that point is, or they don't quit, quickly enough and go do something that's going to be more prosperous for them, well, then they end up in a position where they could end up losing stuff, and this is where you hear about these stories of failure, financial failure for individuals when they get involved in some kind of new business.
And that's really heavy, and that's a lot to think about. And you make me think about, like, when I was a kid, I knew some girl in my neighborhood whose dad had the garage filled up with all this weird machinery, and I had no idea what it was, but just her dad wanted to become some kind of a business owner and start some new business. And all I know about that whole fiasco was that it failed before it even started. There was a lot of just making dumb decisions and buying a lot of things. And so when there's this path of you're starting with something that's already established, I mean, it's a little bit mind-blowing when you say that there's these advantages where it's already got cash flow, it's already making money, so you're just picking up something that has already been proven to work, as opposed to, I mean, who knows how many businesses you might try on your own where this fails, this fails, this fails. And then what's really cool, which I hadn't even thought of, was where you said that the banks are already open to this. They're not lending you money for an unproven idea. You're kind of, when you buy this business, you're inheriting all this history and just all these, financial records of, look, this is working, this is making money, we just need to expand it. And so when you say that there are existing resources that we can then apply somewhere else to our real dream, do you have any examples or cool stories of that? Because that is what really gets the light bulb turned on for me right now.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll give you a real life example from back when I used to be a full-time business broker, helping people buy and sell businesses. And now I help people in the same way, but on a consulting basis. But back in my business broker days, I had a guy who bought a pizzeria. So the pizzeria made money. He was looking for an income. He had lost his position, had a rather high level position in a bigger company. So he was looking for an income for himself. And so he bought the pizzeria. And from that moment, he was able to enjoy the income the pizzeria provided. But if you think about most pizza shops, they do a little bit of business at lunch sometimes. Most of their business is in the evenings, and they're open late on the weekends, right? When people want to have pizzas delivered to their home. That oven sits idle all morning. This guy started a gourmet cookie brand. So he started to make and sell these cookies with almost no startup capital or investment required other than buying ingredients, because he had a commercial kitchen already that was already licensed and certified. He had the ovens already, and he had several hours every morning that he was able to run that business before he had to start making pizzas. And so he was able to test out the viability of whether or not it made sense to get into the cookie business without really risking anything, just by investing in some flour and sugar and other ingredients. And so, in the book, I point out the example of large companies. If you think about a really super big company like Procter and Gamble, they're always coming up with new things, new products, new kinds of shampoo or food products, what have you, and they try them out and they test them. And a lot of those things don't work, just like in our startup example. But within the sort of realm of that big company, they've got all the resources and things they need. So it's not really a very big risk to go and try something. And if it fails, well, then they try again. And this is part of their normal growth operation. There's no reason why people in the small business world can't, sort of take that example and apply it in their own way.
And I have actually, in a way, applied that technique where of saying, well, I want to try out this experiment. And then for years hesitating or delaying because it's unproven. I don't know how much money it would cost. I'd have to hire a person for this and that. And over the years of doing this podcast, probably the number one aha people have shared with me is not it's taking too long to hire people, right? Saying I need to hire people, I need to have people run things. And for the longest time, I hesitated hiring someone for this or that idea. But then finally, once I did a little bit of the mindset where you're mentioning of just go at first with what works and what's established, and then go and play around later with the pie in the sky. And so I hired a team. I hired a few people to kind of get clients and do the boring, mundane tasks. And then there's always some free hours in the day or in the week to try out something else, like you said, with lower risk or almost risk-free, because you already have the established, proven what's making money. But then there's also time in a way for free to pursue the kind of the fun projects. And whether that means it's a matter of like employees or like this oven equipment. I mean, it's no one talks about this, right? Of having something making money, and then with the extra little bit of time, then do the fun things that may pay off or may not. If they pay off, great. If not, you didn't lose anything. I mean, it's a really cool idea.
Yeah, well, the internet is filled with people who are out there talking about how you need to, give it your all and, sort of burn the ships and like go forward. And, if you really want it hard enough, you're going to succeed. But the reality is most new things fail. And so my, approach to entrepreneurship has always been, what is the possible upside? What are all the downsides? And how can we explore if this is really going to work for us while limiting those downsides? And, the gamble it all entrepreneurship, I think, might be okay for people that are quite young and maybe don't have children and a mortgage and all those other responsibilities. But, as we get older and we get sort of into middle age, we have a lot of responsibilities, and we need to figure out how we can do these types of things in a way that makes sense. And so that we're not, taking crazy risks. It's just my opinion and my way of looking at the world.
Well, it's not sustainable. After a while, it's time to grow up. I mean, one time I was maybe like 22 years old, and I won a jackpot in a slot machine, and I had like $1,200. And the first thing my dad said was, "Well, you can't do that every week. Like you can't take that to the bank every week. Like there's a difference between like having a stroke of luck and then being able to repeat that." And like you said, like there's the different mindsets, and maybe early on you're having fun, you're taking risks, but after a while, once you have expenses, responsibilities, then maybe put those life lessons of success and failure to work instead of just repeating the same old failure mistakes. Or like what we're talking about here is kind of do the thing that logically makes sense when you risk the pros and cons, and then you can still fit in the risks, or like the moonshots, but with the calculated risks on a smaller scale, and when you also have something to fall back on. And so since we're talking about maybe the downsides of this, like what do people need to know? Like what are the common mistakes, or what are the things that just people are just doing again and again without you and without having this guidance that they need?
Yeah, sure. I mean, when it comes to buying a business, there's a whole bunch of things that I see over and over again. So small businesses are typically presented with a cash flow figure that's called seller's discretionary earnings. And it's the total amount of money available to an owner operator that works full time. And so some of the key things that are often missing for most buyers who've never gone through this kind of process before is they will forget to back out some figure out of that number for what their time is actually worth, the money that they need to represent the day-to-day time they're going to spend in the business. The other thing that's usually not in that figure is your finance costs. So what's your debt service going to be? What's that going to cost you? And then, things like taxes are not in that number, or capital expenditures, because they usually back out depreciation when they're looking at that seller's discretionary earnings number. So I've seen a lot of people who will get excited when they go out and start looking at the world of buying a small business, and they'll say, here's a business that's going to earn me $300,000. And I'll correct them. I'll say, no, the seller's discretionary earnings is $300,000. That's the money that you're going to have. And then out of there, you got to pay your debts, pay your taxes. You have to take money home to feed your family, and you got to take care of any, sort of new equipment that has to be replaced and stuff like that. And so people will tend to over commit from that money to their debt service, for example. And they'll think, well, if I if I've got this 300 grand of STE, then it's okay for me to agree to make loan payments of 200 grand a year. Well, it's not. And so people get excited. They fall into what we call buyer fever, where they start to daydream about what it's going to be like once they own the business. And they can make these little missteps that can really set them up for a problem. Because here's the other thing about small business is that depending on what kind of industry you're in, a very small decline in sales can be a large decline in profits. Businesses are what we call an asymmetrical system. So if you have a large overhead component in your business, sometimes a 10% decline in sales could be a 30% decline in your profits. And so if you've overcommitted that cash flow to debt service and you have a rather small decline in sales, then all of a sudden you're in a position where maybe you can't take that paycheck anymore. And so this is why, a lot of people will go out and they'll find resources like my YouTube channel where I talk about this kind of stuff all the time. And they'll hire someone like me to help them go through this and make sure that they're not setting themselves up for a mistake, even though they're buying a business that's already successful. If you don't buy it in the correct fashion, you can put yourself in danger even still.
And I think we've all dealt with that in one way or another, like the issue of, first of all, there's like a whole map basically of things to be aware of or account for. And if someone is missing some pieces of the map, there might be this whole factor that you're missing, right? Or this whole expense of it. And there's also I don't know even how to phrase it, but it's like the not looking out for the wiggle room, right? Like how you're saying, well, if there's just a little bit of a decline, it'll cause this. And the tendency, like you said, with the buyer fever is to want to be so optimistic that all the numbers match up perfectly and everything's at 100%. And if there's, like you said, if there's 300 grand left over, then I'm putting 200 grand into the debt, and just like on paper, all the numbers work out just fine without accounting for things that are unexpected. And so it's almost a little bit scary going at it alone. I mean, it's like, imagine trying to like go to court and represent yourself in court without an attorney. You'd be like, where do I even start? Like, I don't even know what I'm supposed to know, let alone what I'm not supposed to know. And so it sounds like this is a thing where just like we're buying the business, we need to let go of our ego, and maybe we need to let go of the ego of thinking we can figure out this whole strategy ourselves. And so that's why people need your book and your podcast. So can you tell us a little bit more about like what we didn't have time to cover in your book, and tell us about your podcast? Because it all sounds like things that when I was in my 20s, I didn't care about. But now, even like when you're mentioning some of these terms, I'm like, like that's something I want to like know a little bit more about. Maybe I'm getting old or something like that, but it feels like as we get older, we want to know a little bit more about this geeky stuff, because maybe we missed out on it before. So yeah, tell me about this book and podcast.
Yeah, sure. So, if people are interested in learning about small business and making deals, I would recommend that you find my YouTube channel or my podcast. It's called David Barnett on YouTube. Small Business and Deal Making is what the podcast feed is called. And you can find those easily by going to my blog site at davidcbarnett.com. I've got a bunch of books on Amazon. They're all about small and medium-sized businesses and doing transactions, and they're all available on Kindle and audiobook. But really, if people are curious to learn more, head over to davidcbarnett.com. You'll find links to those YouTube videos and other things that I've created. Consume away. I mean, there's literally, you can spend weeks looking at that stuff and there's no cost at all. And then if you want to learn more, I've got, like I said, some books, some online courses. And if people are about to get into a deal, that's when people, they hit the button and they contact me and they engage me for some consulting work, and I help them actually look at the deal that they're working on and give them some guidance and advice to make sure that they don't do something silly, or that they simply do their deal in a risk-reduced fashion. I'll give you one quick example about that, Robert. So for example, you can have a deal and you can have a price, and the price might make sense, but if you're worried that the sales might be going down, for example, we can build things into the deal that help give you wiggle room into the future. So with this pandemic going on and all of the uncertainty around, government rules about business closures and stuff like that, I've helped more and more of my clients build in these clauses into the financing that allow them to make interest-only payments if sales go to a certain level, for example. what that can do is it means that when you get into a tight spot because the government just made you close your dining room, if you're a restaurant, for example, it means that you know that you've got this flexibility in your payments without having to go and talk to the lender and ask them to make a special consideration for you. It's so we can actually foresee what are the possible risks to cash flow going into the future, and we can build components into the deal that will help us smooth out those bumps so that we don't have to go begging for those changes later.
Amazing. So you can get the building blocks in place because since you've seen all these things that could happen, might happen, then you can kind of build these what ifs in place in case things go bad. That's pretty cool. And so davidcbarnett.com is the place to go to check out that website, that blog, that podcast. And like David said, most importantly, if you are about to pull the trigger on something, make sure you have an expert you can at least run these ideas by, because it's so hard sometimes to know what's real or what's not. If you yourself are a little bit scared about this deal and maybe you're giving yourself roadblocks that aren't there, or maybe you're so excited that you're ignoring the things that the big red flags or things that David can help you put in place. So davidcbarnett.com. And as we're wrapping up, winding down, is there anything that's a little bit on the fringe or on the cutting edge? And I know that we said that the boring is better many times, but is there anything that is coming up on the horizon for you that has you really excited?
Well, I think if we just have a last minute left, what I'd like to do is I'd like to just give a big warning. You know, there are a lot of industries that have been really impacted in a negative way by the pandemic and everything that's happened as a result of it. And people out there may be tempted by this idea to buy a business that's been negatively impacted because they can get a good deal on it. And I would just warn people that if you buy a distressed business, one that's not making money, not only are you making whatever deal it is you're making today to buy that business, but you're also signing yourself up in many cases to cover losses for an undetermined period of time until things recover. And what we don't know is exactly how long it's going to be before things recover, or even if some industries could be impacted for the long haul as people's habits have changed as a result of this pandemic. There's all kinds of unknowns, and there's a difference between buying a cash flow and spending money on something you think might go up in value. And that difference is called investing versus speculating. And one is inherently more risky than the other. And that's one of the big messages I try to get across to people, is that if you're going to be an investor, it means putting your money down and knowing with a certain degree of reality what flow of money is going to be coming back into your pocket from having made that investment.
Thank you very much for the warning. Very well put. Thank you. David Barnett, davidcbarnett.com, to find out about the upside and the downside of buying a business and growing it and pursuing your dreams. davidcbarnett.com is the place to go. Thanks, David, for stopping by.
Awesome, Robert. Thanks for having me. It's good to see you again.
Go right now to marketeroftheday.com/iTunes to subscribe to the show, listen to other episodes, and rate and review the show.